In this final session, I want to demonstrate how a materialist dialectical approach works in terms of thinking. In other words, I'm talking about the process, the activity and practice of cognition, how we develop a deep understanding of a thing or a phenomenon that has a material objective existence. Understanding how and why our global reality can change rapidly, even overnight, in a fundamental way, and how we need to act is our challenge. The coronavirus pandemic and the Russian invasion of Ukraine have transformed the world irrevocably, with consequences yet to unfold. If we are to act in a world in constant change and transformation, it's essential that we develop our own independent outlook in opposition to the method of thinking passed down to us and reinforced in schools and universities. As we have discussed, the dominant philosophical outlook very much reinforces the status quo. It encourages us to think that the capitalist system is both permanent and natural, and that revolutionary change is dangerous and can never succeed. In Britain, empiricism separates out thought processes that are connected to each other in actuality. Reality is examined in a static, unchanging, non-historical way, and we're encouraged to hold a binary, fixed view of the world. Something is either one thing or the other. Contradictions are viewed as a problem of thought, rather than a natural phenomenon. Let's now look at the way our cognitive process operates through objective dialectical laws. These are summarized as the unity, interpenetration, and transformation of opposites. We can understand them in the following way. We can only exist as a part of, in unity and conflict with, nature and society. Our unity with the world is primary. Nature and society interpenetrate and interact with us and in us. We breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. The transformation of a quantity into new quality, and vice versa, is a law-governed process. For example, plants use solar energy, water and carbon dioxide to create chemical energy and oxygen through the process of photosynthesis. So a quantity of sunlight is transformed into a new quality, chemical energy in the form of carbohydrates. Or an oppressed nation transforms itself into a new quality of independence. The aim of a materialist dialectical approach is to capture the movement of the real in our thinking. I will explain how we achieve this through a sequence of logical thought concepts and categories. Achieving this will enable us to conceptualize revolutionary change. Before we start to elaborate the process and practice of cognition, I'd like to explain the concept of self-movement. All phenomena, including society, nature, and thought, are in constant motion. You'll soon see why this is important. Everything is in motion because it exists in time and space. So things are at one point and another point at the same time. In this way, they exhibit contradiction. Take a wooden table, for example. It appears stable, but forces of decay within the wood will, left to their own devices, eventually overwhelm its structure and it will fall apart. As we and society are part of matter in motion, self-movement includes everything from the firing of neural networks in our brains, the exchange of commodities, to the reflexive self-consciousness of human beings in society. All biological life is also characterized by self-movement. Examples include the formation of galaxies, a sprouting seed, and a growing child, natural human creativity and talent, and the arising of social movements. Paul Dirac, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, explaining the motion of elementary particles, remarked, "The state of no motion is the state of no particles." In other words, motion is an inherent property of matter. It is self-movement, for example, like clouds gathering in the sky, or a person saying hello to you, which will stimulate our senses. This sensation, This energy, this form of matter in motion, is our initial thinking connection with the real world outside of us. The 17th century English philosopher John Locke, who we met in an earlier session, put forward the idea that sensations coming into us from the outside are the source and starting point of knowledge. We can sum this up as I feel, therefore I am. Most, but not all, philosophers now accept this fundamental thought. Our physical presence and activity in the world give rise to psychological and mental activity. For example, we hear on the news that tanks are assembling on the borders of Ukraine, or there's evidence of a growing economic crisis. We become aware that something has changed. So the process of cognition always has a particular finite starting point. You see your friend's face, which looks pale. She starts coughing. This is the starting point for a process of thought. We have identified that she appears unwell. There is something different in herself. So any identity contains difference within itself. This transition of identity into something different is what we call negation, the transformation of one thing into its opposite, health into possible illness. This single moment, the moment of identifying difference, is the beginning of analysis. The term negation, as we saw in earlier sessions, does not mean obliteration or cancelling out. There is an interruption and a connection at the same time. She is still your friend, with the same face that you recognize, but is different. As we shall see, this is the first of further negations. The arising of difference may jar our consciousness. It may appear simply as insignificant, a chance anomaly, wrong, or out of place, because it does not fit in with our earlier understanding. It's easy to dismiss it rather than to grasp it as the beginning of something utterly new and different, which requires further examination. It is a new moment because something in the world beyond our thought, in your friend's existence, has changed into something different. In practice, we think like this every day at some time or another. This way of understanding identity is, of course, fundamentally different from the formal or the Aristotelian law of identity, or A equals A, which we discussed in the earlier session. In formal logic, something can only be equal to itself and cannot contain change or difference. But on closer examination, this can only be true as an abstraction. In the physical, material world, true concrete identity, as Engels wrote in Dialectics of Nature, includes difference, change, as shown in detail by natural science. At this point in the process, all we can and should say is that something has changed out there. Our lack of or absence of knowledge can be described as an other, something not yet in existence, which however is beginning to emerge. The assembling of tanks and troops on Ukraine's border is a case in point. At that moment there was no attack. From the mass of tanks and troops to the invasion was a leap from quantity into quality, from the non-existent invasion to the actual invasion. In other words, from not being in transition to being. Trying to find out more drives us back to further examination, seeking more indications of what was happening. This striving to find out more constitutes a second negation, whereby the difference in thought relates back to a new moment in the changing world. In trying to develop our understanding of the new, we are driven to dive deeper by the fact that our knowledge is incomplete. Our lack of knowledge is a negative force compelling us to seek out new identities, quantities, qualities, causes, and contradictions. This is a third moment in the logical sequence that began, as you recall, with a simple identity of the thing. Analyzing something in transition from identity to difference, as in observing the gathering of Russian tanks, we gain an understanding which, however, is incomplete. Now the new causes and qualities begin to fill out, enrich our concept to make it more complete. We are now forming a further, more complex concept than that with which we began. We are negating further identities or causes, properties and features from a constantly changing and evolving totality into thought and our existing knowledge in our quest to understand a new phenomenon. In dialectical cognition, we now evaluate, adjust, and even possibly overturn our previous knowledge as we extend and expand our earlier concepts. It is here that our subjective existence as thinking human beings comes to the fore. We seek to develop new concepts that embrace the new and track it as a source of development. We have arrived at the application of the third law of dialectics, the negation of negation. What does this mean? This is a twofold process. The thing that we are studying and our investigation of it may seem to repeat earlier events and knowledge. For example, the invasion of Ukraine in some respects is the same as the invasion of Chechnya in 1994 or Czechoslovakia in 1968. But it is not. It is a negation of those events, because while it seems to be the same kind of action, there are entirely new circumstances. The Soviet Union no longer exists. Ukraine has been independent since 1991, and Putin's invasion is something different and new. So we are developing a new concept of it. We study the parts of this phenomenon, which may include internal political trajectory in Russia, the country's relationship with its Soviet past, its perception of a threat from the West via NATO, the desire of former satellite states to look to Brussels rather than Moscow, and so on. In developing our knowledge, we have synthesized our individual and collective knowledge with the moment that we have just negated. Therefore, it's a negation of the negation, both in reality and in our thought. If we consciously embrace rather than exclude contradictory opposites, the old knowledge and the new, which is often quite challenging, the impulse from reality enters and enlivens thought. In this way, we can enrich and deepen our knowledge. Instead of empty, dead abstractions, we strive for concepts filled with a living content. This ability to hold together opposites in thought is crucial because it allows us to penetrate deeper into a process. It is simultaneously analytical and synthetic, a mental union of analysis and synthesis. It is analytical because when examining a new phenomenon, a new identity, we separate it out from its background. We examine and explore the internal contradictions. This can be described as determining the concept out of itself. At the same time, we are aware that each part that we negate exists in a totality, an ensemble of moments of reality. So synthesis means seeing each contradictory part as partying or self-moving within a whole, like a dancer in a corps de ballet, a musician in an orchestra, or a nerve cell within a neural network. We now create a new whole in thought from the separate analyzed parts. The development of dialectical concepts is a process of endless discovery and deepening of knowledge, but is not a smooth, step-by-step evolution. It involves slow, quantitative accretions and sudden moments of qualitative change, or leaps. We have arrived at a new moment in thought, which is a third negation. The reflection of the world within our thought, within our abstract thought, now acquires a concrete life of its own. Our ideal mental world becomes increasingly real as it fills with living content. The external moment of reality acquires force and power as it is recreated as an internal inner impulse within our thought. To recap, arriving at truth is a process in 3 stages. 1. Life itself. 2. Human knowledge, which includes practice and technique, bringing together the object with ourselves as subjects. And 3. Checking or proving the truth of our reflections in practice. At this point, we orientate our thought to what we need to do, our practice. We can reflect and draw on the power, the substance of the spontaneous movement of the real within our thought. In striving to develop strategies for the challenges of today, constantly re-examining and examining rapid changes in all aspects of today's crisis and how they impact masses of people, as well as the way these affect consciousness, is our top priority. What was true for yesterday may not be true today. That doesn't mean throwing out our earlier understanding out the window in an opportunist fashion. It does mean being prepared to refresh our analysis instead of being blinded by dogmas of various kinds. In this way, we strive for active, flexible concepts, which need developing into theoretical ideals and new possibilities. Realizing those is the next step, leading to practical ideas and practice itself. In this way, we can overcome the opposition between abstract thought and reality, and become freely acting, dynamic agents of change. And now I'd like to introduce you to Evol Ilyenkov. He was an oppositional Marxist philosopher in the Soviet Union. He forged a creative, active approach, breaking with the dogmatic scholasticism that debased so much of official philosophy in his time. He showed how abstract entities or ideals, such as value, democracy, freedom, national identity, are the outcome of human practice and labor. Having ideals is inherent in our desire to realize our very own nature as individuals and social beings. For Ilyenkov, the ideal constitutes a peculiar category of phenomena which are independent of an individual. They are universal, commonly held image patterns as opposed to the awareness of an individual's soul. The ideal and ideals, therefore, are not something that exists only in the mind of an individual person. Rather, they are an integral component of human, objective, social, and political realities. Ilyenkov's concept of the ideal helps us grasp how ideals passing into the real through human activity or practice become an objective social force. This enhances the development of strategies to make the transition to a true democracy. The truth content of our cognitive efforts is decisive, but possibility needs to be transformed into necessity as a driving force. This means discovering and identifying the forces within today's society that can make a transition beyond capitalism possible. Understanding the logic, the underlying laws that drive the system, and the contradictions that shape people's thoughts and actions is vital if we're to develop possibilities for new practices. No one single person or group of people or movement can have a premium on the truth. Grasping the revolutionary potential in today's technologies can facilitate a wider and deeper understanding of complex realities than ever before. Let's outstrip the dominion of the masters of capital. What matters is making this world into our world. We can and must use it to let loose the inherent creativity of human beings and the mass desire to live unfettered by capitalism and its horrors.